side in their history that goes back throughout their entire existence, going back to the turn of the millennia. Uh, excuse me, the first millennia. Um, so I wanted to just kind of give again this preamble because we got to watch what happens. Right now, the Russian people, especially the youth, so-called 85%, really support the president. He's quite a rock star. He does that Marlboro Man type of thing. Those of you that remember those commercials. He's a rugged guy. He's a strong guy. He's a patriot. He's religious, and he has taken all of that and wrapped in the. We're going to be sure that we take care of the interests of our poor Russian brethren that are living in other countries. We're going to look after we're not going to let them be persecuted, if you will, by their host nations, whether it's Ukraine or the Baltic republics or Transnistria, which is pretty bogus and absolutely violates every notion of international law, certainly since the post-Cold War order, and in its worst manifestations is reminiscent of the late 1930s in Europe, where countries started to make claims on other countries because of the ethnic populations, and we know where that headed and where that ended up. We don't want to go there. That's why there has been pushback in Ukraine. I want to get at Ukraine right away. This is going to be a long, hot summer, I believe. It's going to be unsatisfactory for the Russians. It's going to be unsatisfactory for the EU. It's going to be unsatisfactory for the United States. But most of all, it's going to be unsatisfactory for Ukraine. But they're going to fight. The Ukrainians are going to fight if the Russians decide to, the proxies, the separatists, continue to try to push out these enclaves in Ukraine. So we're going to have to watch it very, very closely. And my view on Ukraine, and you can see it here. Again, most of you seem pretty seasoned. Of course, I'm all thumbs here on the automation. There we go. Right up here, and we've got the hot spots here. We don't know where this is going to end. We don't know where this is going to end. And if you remember in Georgia in 2008, it ended finally after they had basically, through separatists, created, if you will, the statelets of Abkhazia and Ossetia. So we're going to have to watch this. The reason I want to say right up front, I don't want to provoke Russia. I don't want to have things escalate with Russia. They do have, in my mind, some legitimate grievances as far as how they think the West perceives them and how they may have been treated in the past. But these are not go to war, and these are not international law-breaking grievances. And they are absolutely testing the international order. For those of you that know Article 5, which is the essence of NATO, every nation in NATO will support another nation if attacked. And our leaders are very, very strenuously reminding the Russians, don't test us. Don't do it. Don't test us in the Baltics. Don't test us, wherever else. Because there's Article 5, and we'll be honor bound and obligated to intervene in some way to defend the Balts or any other NATO nation that is aggressed against. But you can see this is actually a pretty dangerous space that I'm talking about. I do know that our leaders, our American leaders, and the NATO leadership is pretty resolute on that. Let's pull back for a minute. I've gotten deep into, Ukraine. I support the sanctions against Russia. I don't like the fact that the sanctions are hurting the Russian people, but there is no we have no tool, and we don't want to use military tools to get at the cabal, the money interests that are part of all of this in Moscow, and make it hurt, and make there be consequences financially to these people who have, through basically mutual loyalty, Putin dispenses patronage, he dispenses access to industry, he dispenses power, he dispenses prestige to this moneyed power vertical, oligarchs in his inner circle and all that. In return, he expects undivided loyalty, all right? And in support for his policies. Now, I don't think that Putin is completely mono-policy creative. I do think he gets advice, all right? I think there are back-channel discussions, but he is the main thinker. He is the decision maker, and there hasn't been a decision maker in Russia with as much concentrated power and access to quick decision maker since that other non-Russian Stalin. All right, though Putin is not Stalin, but I'm trying to say is he's got a lot of influence on that apparat, to include foreign policy and their, if you will, in worst case, how they use their military, in the worst case, how they use the nukes. So sanctions get at these people that support him at their money. And they're all loyal, they're all patriotic, but I would submit that some of them are patriotic up to the last ruble and dollar. And if you make it hard for them, they might start tugging it. Vladimir Vladimirovich, let's rethink this carefully. And the trickle-down contract with the people, they're going to allow this corruption to go on as long as, I was starting to say, they're getting benefits out there in the countryside. But what the sanctions have also, in part, precipitated is a economic, a major, I wouldn't quite say collapse, but a major economic crisis for Russia, which was not part of their plan when they started this a year ago. And now out in the countryside, all of a sudden you're not getting the same goods. Half the value of your ruble just disappeared. Oil price, the oil, the government's not getting the money that it was. So this, if it goes long term, is going to create problems for the Russian leadership and hopefully will sway their behavior. I'm not optimistic, but in the end, if there is something that happens to Russia, we do not want Russia to catastrophically collapse in some terrible implosion or explosion way. You want it to try to figure out a way to evolve into something that sort of is part of a more acceptable international norm. I think that's a pie-in-the-sky sentiment that I just expressed, but a angry, lashing out, defensive Russian government who are in part about regime perpetuation, they feel they're going down. I don't know what will happen. Nobody knows. The Soviets were more predictable. It doesn't have to go bad, but the Russians are experiencing significant stress, despite, if you will, the widely trumpeted gains that we have read about. They had a great Sochi that really got the patriotism going, and that was a tailgate kind of party patriotism. Students, I remember seeing students in long convoys with flags, and Russia, we're number one, and this went on after they took Crimea, more troubling. But it was also, we're winning, and it was not, in my mind, as dangerous as the type of nationalism which I think that the Russians increasingly have retrenched since the shoot down of that Air Malaysia jetliner in last July. And all of a sudden, the narrative starts to work not so well for them. And then on top of that, they have they almost lose in eastern Ukraine. And if you remember, in the end of July, they have to intervene. And they do it with this remarkable implausible deniability, which drove all the Western leaders crazy. You know, they're being told by Russian political leaders and senior military people, we're not in eastern Ukraine. We're not there. And I know enough about NATO and all that, and it's been all over the place. We knew they were in eastern Ukraine with main force units. But the Russians, you'd have generals on the phone. Nope. And our leaders would, would the mood, the mind would be, screw these guys. I don't want to talk to these guys. They're just lying to us all the time. It's not worth it. We're making an effort. We're looking like supplicants. I can't believe that he just lied to me. And what really is crazy is that he knows that I know that he's lying to me. But that U.S. decision maker wasn't the target. The target is the national population that might not necessarily fully support an adventure in Ukraine by main force Russian units. And you've been reading the news. There have been a lot of Russian, mostly men, that have disappeared, the soldiers. So this Ukrainian thing, if it continues to fester, it could create major problems, sort of a gigantic Northern Ireland plus for Russia. It was expensive, it could be a bleeding ulcer, and so we'll have to see. But the Russians have got to do something. The separatists and the proxies, and we're trying to figure out that this summer. And this leads me to the next point. I talked about the sanctions. 2, I was against it a few months ago, probably 5 months ago, even right into Minsk I, which was the first peace deal, if you will, involving the Russians and Ukrainians with a bunch of other nations. And I now support preferably coalition defensive aid, enhanced defensive aid to Ukraine. They're out there without an alliance system. They're trying to, look, they've got huge issues. I mean, they're still got terrible corruption through their oligarch system that's going to take a long time to root out, and a whole lot of other problems. But they are, right now, victims. Now, Ukrainians haven't made it easy for themselves because they haven't been fully able to bring under control all these nationalist militias that will, show symbology that looks Nazi-like, that the Russians will take and just spread all over Russia media. And when Ukraine was going on and really heating up in April and May, I'd go out into the Russian hinterland and watch Russian television. And it was just crazy, the superimposition of Ukrainian symbology with swastikas in Waffen-SS rooms, and then showing Ukrainian Russian wives crying and babies battered and houses blowing up. And this is going on for weeks and weeks and weeks. And if I'm a coal miner up in the freaking Ural Mountains after watching a month of this on my television, I'm ready to drop my pickaxe or jackhammer, grab a Kalashnikov, and volunteer for Eastern Ukraine. So again, we're back into that very, very, very challenging media space. But I support. The bottom line is that they need the wherewithal to be able to defend themselves. There will be those that say, well, the Russians will just escalate. They've already escalated. They've already escalated. And they're continuing to escalate. It's not a fair fight. And this is on Ukrainian national soil. The Russians wanted to sort out, the separatists. Eastern Ukraine and the boundaries in Crimea, they should have taken the political solution. It would have been longer, it would have been less satisfactory, and they may not have gotten what they wanted. But that was the right approach. However, 80% of the population are absolutely on board with what happened in Crimea. I'll tell one story about that and then move to the last point on this side. I'm on a train. I'm on a train between Yekaterinburg, which is here. That used to be Sverdlov. That's where Putin used to come from, to Kazan. And Kazan is Islam. It's Tatarstan. And I'm on a night train last summer, right before I go in July, and MH17 had just been shot down. And I'm in a couchette with a berth with 3 other Russians. I'm in regular couchette. One is a plumber from Kazan. Another one is a surveyor from Stavropol, which is roughly here where Gorbachev come. And the third was a ethnic Russian Chechen from Grozny. And as an American showing up in the couchette, it was, what the hell is this? And this is my last week in Russia. And we start talking, and I tell them, they ask, yes, I'm in the embassy. No, I don't tell them I'm a freaking army general. And we get on these discussions, and we get on to Crimea. And here I am, it's very diplomatic, trying to explain, in my pretty pedestrian Russian, guys, and vodka is going. We're all drinking vodka. You get a lot done in Russia at vodka to vodka level. I can't tell you. You need our leaders to get out from the side of these tables, and after the tables, you need to go into a parlor room, sit down, and really, really have a conversation. Russians don't like the fact that we have a very, very transactional, very business-like approach. I'm generalizing because they can be very, very much that way as well. But when we were working the military to military aspects, they wanted to build relationships too. And so did we. So I'm on this train, and I'm talking to these 3 smart, not particularly well educated, but smart, elemental Russian and the Tatar from Kazan, a plumber,